In the opulent hills of Langata, Nairobi, stood the mansion of the Ayanda family, a palace of sleek architecture, imported marble, and mirrored ceilings. It belonged to billionaire tycoon Mzee Joram Ayanda, a widower who had built an empire of luxury resorts across Africa. But more than his wealth, what people whispered about was his peculiar twin sons, Milo and Mica Ayanda, handsome, sharp, and exceedingly difficult to please, especially when it came to food. From the time they were 6, they had turned their noses at the elaborate meals prepared by top chefs flown in from France, Italy, even Morocco. No matter the fame or flair, nothing ever met their mysterious standard of taste. One after another, chefs and maids were dismissed, replaced, or transferred to other estates. The mansion's grand dining hall became a battleground of disappointed professionals and untouched gourmet plates. By the time the twins turned 16, their rejections had become legend. Mzee Ayanda, known for his calm and patience in boardrooms, often sat fuming in private, baffled that no cuisine on earth seemed to please his boys. Nutritionists were brought in. Therapists suggested it was psychological. Still, the twins remained polite yet firm. This is not the taste we remember. But no one could decipher what exactly they meant. They didn't crave junk food either. No pizza, burgers, or soft drinks. They simply longed for a flavor they remembered vaguely, like a scent from a dream. Mzee Ayanda, frustrated, finally told the head housekeeper to stop hiring expensive help and try local maids instead. Maybe it's not in the money. Maybe it's something more humble, he muttered one evening. That was how, one rainy morning, a girl with worn slippers and a loosely tied headscarf knocked on the mansion's towering gates, looking for work. Her name was Mami, and she had come from the edge of Kibra with nothing but hope, hunger, and an old cooking pot in her kiondo. The guard nearly sent her away, but the housekeeper, desperate and curious, decided to let her try. Just one trial meal, she said. Mami stood in the corner of the estate kitchen, unsure of where to begin. The place was unlike anything she had ever seen. Walls lined with spice racks from every continent, touchscreen stoves, chrome everything, and an automated fridge that spoke in English and French. Yet, none of it moved her. She quietly placed her kiondo on the table, untied it, and pulled out a tiny tin of her late grandmother's homemade spice blend. It was a mix of hand-dried herbs, sun-roasted seeds, and something else that she never revealed before she died. When life's flavor disappears, this will restore it, her grandmother had whispered. The other kitchen staff stared curiously as Mami requested a charcoal stove. She ignored their scoffs and instead asked for the most basic ingredients: onions, tomatoes, green bananas, and a small packet of maize flour. Her fingers moved with reverence, slicing, stirring, layering flavor as if she were building a prayer. The aroma that began to lift from the pot was nothing extravagant, but it pulled something ancient into the room. Even the arrogant French sous chef paused mid-stir. What is that smell? By noon, her meal was ready. Simple matoke with a thick herb stew and freshly stirred ugali that felt like home. It was plated humbly, without garnish or decoration, and placed before the twins who, as usual, sat at the far end of the 20-seater mahogany table, bored and unimpressed. The butler served the food without comment, already bracing for rejection. Milo lifted a fork, then paused. His nostrils flared slightly. Mica leaned in as if magnetized by memory. They took their first bites, and the room fell completely silent. The other maids stood at a distance, blinking in disbelief. Bite after bite, the twins chewed slowly, eyes dark with concentration. Then Milo looked up, and for the first time in years smiled. "This," he said softly, "this is it." Mica nodded, his eyes moist with something between joy and sorrow. "This is the taste," he echoed. The head housekeeper nearly dropped the silver tray she was carrying. Mzee Ayanda, watching through the glass wall from his office above, stood up slowly, his heart thudding. Downstairs, Mommy bowed her head, not in pride, but in silent gratitude to the spirit of her grandmother, whose taste had found its way back into the world. Word of Mommy's culinary miracles spread like wildfire through the mansion. The head chef, a stern woman from Belgium named Colette, was the first to show resistance. "It's absurd," she barked the next morning. "You think a village girl with no formal training just stumbled upon the key to these boys' taste buds? Impossible." But the twins had spoken, and their words were gospel. Mommy had been asked to prepare breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and for the first time in years, the twins cleared their plates. The other maids, some supportive, others jealous, watched the transformation unfold. Mommy didn't act triumphant. She remained quiet, respectful, and focused. She still washed her own dishes, even though she now had helpers. When the head housekeeper offered her a bigger room, Mommy declined. "Let me earn it," she whispered. Despite the rising tension, her food created peace in the hearts of the twins, and that was all she cared about. Behind closed kitchen doors, however, resentment was boiling. Colette began assigning Mommy the dirtiest chores: gutting fish, peeling sacks of potatoes, scrubbing the walk-in freezer. But Mommy took it all in stride, humming as she worked. The twins, unaware of the silent kitchen war, began spending more time in the cooking area, curious about this girl who had revived their appetites. One afternoon, they caught her grinding spices on a stone slab outside, her hands moving with a rhythm they couldn't look away from. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" Milo asked. "From my grandmother," she said without pausing. "She cooked with her heart. The tongue remembers what love tastes like." Mica scribbled the quote into his notebook, something he rarely did unless deeply moved. That evening, Colette submitted her resignation. "I will not be outshined by a barefoot miracle," she muttered before walking out. But for Mommy, the kitchen didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like sacred ground. And unknown to her, upstairs in his office, Maids Ayanda had called for a private investigator. He needed to know who this girl really was, and why her food had awakened something even he couldn't describe. The private investigator arrived in silence, dressed as a supply delivery man. Maids Ayanda had hired him discreetly, not because he suspected Mommy of harm, but because something about her was hauntingly familiar. That night, after the household had quieted and the lights in the grand halls dimmed to gold, the man slipped into the quarters, checking files, asking hushed questions, and tracing the path of this poor girl who had so easily cracked the code no millionaire could. Her name, he confirmed, was Mami Achieng. Born in Kisumu, orphaned by 10, raised by her maternal grandmother who died just last year. No criminal records, no school past Form 4. But it was the photograph he found tucked in the folds of her old Bible. A weathered snapshot of a younger Maids Ayanda, smiling beside a woman who looked startlingly like Mommy. That shook him. He returned it carefully and reported what he'd seen. "Sir, the resemblance is not just coincidental. I believe she may be blood." The next morning, Maids Ayanda looked at Mommy differently. As she stood over the stove preparing the twins' breakfast, smoked tilapia with lemon-infused sukuma and soft arrowroot. He watched the curve of her brow, the determined set of her jaw. It echoed his late wife in a way he couldn't explain. The memory of a long-forgotten affair during his youth, before he married, flickered in his mind like a half-lit bulb. Could she be? He didn't speak of it. Not yet. Instead, he invited her to bring the food upstairs, breaking the house rule that only senior staff could enter his wing. Mommy hesitated, hands trembling as she knocked gently at the door of the study. "Come in," he said, softer than usual. She stepped in barefoot, tray balanced with grace, and placed it on the table. Their eyes met. "You cook like someone who has known hunger," he said, watching her closely. She nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." Hunger and silence. It was a cryptic reply, but it nestled deep in his chest. As she left the room, he whispered, Silence carries stories too. The twins noticed their father's odd gaze at breakfast, but they said nothing. In their hearts, they too sensed a story was rising, one seasoned with history, grief, and a strange kind of love. Rain fell softly on the mansion's vast skylights as Mommy dusted the old pantry shelves. It was her quiet space, a forgotten corner where no one ventured, full of rusted tins, antique jars, and crumbling recipe books from the Ayanda family's early days. One afternoon, she stumbled upon a small leather-bound journal, wedged between two spice boxes labeled in fading Swahili. The journal was not marked, but when she opened it, she gasped. Inside were handwritten recipes, dated nearly 25 years ago, in ink that had bled but not faded. And the handwriting, it matched her grandmother's. Boil cassava gently, not to feed hunger, but to stir memory, one note read. Another entry listed a spice blend, almost identical to Mommy's inherited one. Her heart thudded in her chest. What was her grandmother's recipe journal doing in this house? She clutched it close, staring at the signature in the back. Wanjiku Achieng Ayanda. Her grandmother had used the Ayanda name. Her grandmother had been here. Mommy's breath caught as pieces of her past began to stitch themselves into sense. The stories her grandmother told. The beautiful mansion she once worked in. The man she once loved but never married. The heartbreak that followed. This was the house. And that man. Could he be Mzi Ayanda? She turned the pages with trembling fingers. It wasn't just a cookbook. It was a diary. Laced between recipes were reflections, heartbreaks, and letters never sent. One read, "To Joram, if only you had chosen me, our daughter would have grown in sunlight." Mommy dropped to the floor, the weight of it collapsing her knees. She wasn't just a girl with a good spice mix. She was the granddaughter of the woman who once gave this house its flavor. She had unknowingly brought the taste of the past back to its rightful table. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by her small window, journal in hand, watching the rain fall like memory over the gardens below. When dawn broke, she tucked the journal into her apron and went to the kitchen. She would speak to Mzi Ayanda soon. But first, she had one last meal to cook, her grandmother's forgiveness stew. The next evening, Mommy prepared the meal with a precision and softness that seemed almost sacred. Every herb, every root, every grain was chosen deliberately, as though her hands were guided by the memory of a woman who had once stood in the very same kitchen decades earlier. She called it forgiveness stew, just as her grandmother had named it. A slow-cooked blend of ndengu, coconut milk, roasted pumpkin, and tamarind paste, with faint hints of dried lemongrass and cumin. The aroma was not just rich, it was nostalgic. Mommy wept quietly as she stirred, letting her tears fall into the steam like prayer. She knew this meal was not about pleasing the twins anymore. It was about speaking to the past, to pain, and to the man who had unknowingly abandoned a part of himself in Kisumu all those years ago. As she ladled the stew into a calabash bowl, she placed the recipe journal beside it. The message was clear. This was more than food. It was history served warm. She climbed the stairs slowly, barefoot as always, and knocked gently on Mzi Ayanda's door. He opened it himself this time, and when he saw her face, tired, glowing, and wet with something unspoken, he stepped aside without a word. She placed the bowl on his desk and then, almost ceremonially, laid the journal beside it. His eyes widened. He picked up the book, opened it, and stared at the handwriting as if seeing a ghost. "Wanjiku," he breathed. Mommy nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "She was my grandmother." Silence filled the room like thunder without sound. He sat down heavily in his chair, running a hand over the worn pages. "She was everything kind and warm. And I was young, reckless, too bound to family expectations." He dipped a spoon into the stew and paused. One taste, and his eyes filled with tears. "She made this once, On the night I told her we couldn't be. Mommy sat on the floor, just like her grandmother must have, head bowed. She forgave you, she said. She just never told you. For the first time in decades, Mzi Ayanda wept, not like a tycoon or a patriarch, but like a man who had remembered who he once was, and who he could have become. The next morning, the mansion was quieter than usual. No clatter of pots, no rustle of uniforms or loud instructions from the head housekeeper. Something had shifted in the air. Mzi Ayanda had summoned his sons to his private study, an act that usually meant business or punishment. But when the twins entered, they found him seated in his kaftan, a bowl of half-eaten stew on his desk, and a leather-bound journal beside it. Mommy stood near the window, her face unreadable. Milo and Mica glanced at her, then at their father. "Sit," he said, voice low. He handed them the journal. They flipped through it with furrowed brows. Recipes, yes, but also letters, secrets, grief. "Your mother was not the first woman I loved," their father said, his voice trembling. "Her name was Maica Ayanda. She left without a trace after I broke her heart. This girl, Mommy, she is Maica's granddaughter, which means she is family." The twins looked from their father to Mommy in stunned silence. Mommy lowered her eyes. "I didn't come here to find family. I only wanted to cook." The silence stretched long, broken only by the flipping of a page. Then Mica closed the journal and exhaled. "No wonder your food tastes like something we lost. It was never about ingredients, was it?" Milo smiled, though his eyes glistened. "It was about blood, about memory." The room, once thick with formality and wealth, now felt like a family lounge in a village homestead. Mommy stepped forward hesitantly. "I don't want special treatment. Let me keep working. Let me keep cooking." Mzi Ayanda stood slowly. "You'll always cook if you choose to, Mommy. But not as a servant. As my granddaughter." Her breath hitched, and her eyes brimmed. "Your grandmother once fed my soul. Now you've done the same." The twins, unspoken in their bond, moved forward and hugged her at once. Mommy wept silently between them. It was not the mansion that had softened. It was the hearts within it. Somewhere beyond the glass windows, the scent of stew still lingered in the air, as if the spirit of Maica Ayanda was smiling. In the weeks that followed, the mansion changed in subtle, powerful ways. The kitchen no longer buzzed with rivalry, but with reverence. Staff who once looked down on Mommy now stood in quiet awe as she prepared meals that moved even the most stone-hearted guests. But she remained humble, grounding her success in daily rituals, singing softly as she cooked, offering the first spoonful to the air, and lighting a single stick of lemongrass incense before each meal. Mzi Ayanda had a table built just for her in the family's private dining room. It was carved from the wood of a jacaranda tree, polished to a golden sheen, and placed across from the twins. The first time she sat at that table, she hesitated. "I'm still learning to belong here," she said. But Milo pulled her chair out with a smile. "Family isn't earned," he said. "It's rediscovered." And Mica added, "Besides, no one deserves to eat alone when they carry the taste of memory." That night's meal was a feast, but not the usual display of extravagance. Mommy served omena fried in groundnut oil, brown ugali, sautéed managu, and a thick fish broth that reminded the twins of something they could never name. The table was silent at first, not out of awkwardness, but reverence. Then laughter began to rise, not forced or formal, but loud, messy, real. The twins joked about their boarding school days, and Mommy, for the first time, laughed without covering her mouth. Mzi Ayanda sat back in his chair, watching them with eyes soft and full. It was the first time since his wife's passing that he felt peace, and maybe, just maybe, a second chance. Later that night, he walked into his study, lit a candle beside Maica's photo, and whispered, "I found her. She found us." As the candle flickered, The taste of that night, the way the broth clung to the tongue, the warmth in the laughter, settled into the walls of the mansion. A new legacy was simmering, and it began at a table for three. The estate buzzed with unusual excitement as preparations began for a feast unlike any other. Mica Ayanda had invited relatives from far and wide, distant cousins and old family friends, to celebrate not only the rediscovery of lost blood, but the healing of old wounds. The grand hall, usually reserved for corporate dinners and stiff gatherings, transformed into a warm sanctuary. Long tables draped in white linen were laden with dishes that told stories. Slow-cooked nyama, fresh spinach sautéed with garlic, sweet mango salad drizzled with lime, and of course, Mommy's signature forgiveness stew. The aroma wove through the air, pulling people from corners and memories alike. The twins, once aloof and distant, moved through the crowd with open smiles, introducing Mommy not as a maid, but as their beloved cousin. It was a homecoming in every sense. As the guests settled, Mica Ayanda raised his glass. Today, we feast not just on food, but on family. He gestured to Mommy. This young woman reminded us that our roots are not just names on a tree, but flavors in our blood. Mommy's eyes shone with tears as the room erupted in applause. Throughout the evening, stories were shared, old letters read aloud, memories rekindled, and laughter echoing like music. Children ran barefoot across the polished floor. Elders swayed to soft rhythms, and the scent of Mommy's cooking lingered, threading generations together. That night, the mansion was no longer just a symbol of wealth. It was a home rebuilt from the rich soil of heritage, love, and second chances. And as the fire flickered low, the twins sat side by side, knowing their lives had changed forever. All because of the humble girl who refused to let a taste go forgotten. The morning after the feast dawned soft and golden, spilling light through the tall windows of the mansion's great hall. The air still carried the faintest traces of spices and laughter, like a memory clinging to the walls. Mommy stood in the kitchen, her hands moving with quiet confidence, preparing breakfast for the family she had never expected to have. Milo and Mica sat nearby, each helping in their own way, peeling fruits, setting plates, and sharing stories of the feast that had bound them all closer than any contract or fortune ever could. The house was alive in a new way, threaded with warmth and belonging, a place where heritage was honored with every meal served, and forgiveness was folded gently into each recipe. Later that day, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with amber hues, Mica Ayanda gathered the family on the veranda. With a voice both proud and tender, he spoke of legacy, not just the billions amassed or the business empires built, but the unseen inheritance of love, resilience, and the courage to reclaim what was lost. He handed Mami a key, the symbol of her rightful place in the family and the mansion's heart. "You have restored more than taste," he said softly. "You have restored us." The twins flanked her, their smiles wide and genuine. And in that moment, the mansion was no longer a fortress of wealth and secrets. It was a home, alive with stories, hope, and the promise that some flavors, like family, could never be forgotten. The night settled in, stars blinking awake, and the rich scent of simmering stew wrapped around them like a benediction. A new chapter had begun, served warm and full of life. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and turn on post notification for more exciting stories from us.